I am going to introduce Mayumi. Mayumi Worgotter, our Director of Internal Communications and DEI at Datadog, where she does a fantastic job. But I don't want to take up too much of her time and telling you about all the amazing things that I love about what she's done. So I'm going to let her take it away and introduce the rest of the panel.
Well, thanks so much, Jason. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. I was just talking with the panelists, and I was saying it's interesting. We're in a tech conference. We're talking about exciting product launches and features and all sorts of things that are important to the tech industry. And we also made a space to talk about DEI. And obviously, I think very much that's an important part of the tech industry. In these kinds of conferences, we don't typically make the space for it. So it's really cool, one, that Datadog made the space for it, and two, that you made the space in your schedules to also join. So that really means a lot. So thanks so much for being here. My name is Mayumi Worgotter. I lead DEI and internal comms at Datadog. I use pronouns she, her. And I'm going to pass it on to our panelists to introduce themselves.
Hey, nice to see you all. Thank you for coming. I'm Schaab. I'm a manager of sales engineering at Datadog, and my pronouns are they, them.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kristie Baker. I am an engineering manager, leader of the critical operations and reliability engineering at Netflix. My pronouns are she, her.
Hey everyone, I'm Jaime. Pronouns are they, he. I'm a director of technical product management at Indeed. For a visual description, I am an East Asian person with hair done up like a samurai bun, wearing a clingy blue sweater and blue jeans.
Thank you. Thanks for that. So we're all here. We're taking time out of our schedules to have this discussion. DEI is clearly important to us personally and professionally. And we are leaders or in positions of influence, but we know that wasn't always the case for us, right? So can you think of a time in your career where you weren't included or supported, and you had limited power to change that? And how does that influence your approach to inclusive leadership today? I'll start with Sean, because you're closest.
It's funny because it's never a time where you're like directly excluded. Like no one's ever like, you can't do this or you shouldn't have done this. But early on in my career, this is something that Mayumi and I spent some time talking about yesterday. Transitioning, like gender transitioning can be incredibly isolating. And it's something that I don't think necessarily has to do with gender transition. It could be really anything that you go through in your personal life where you start to kind of like isolate from others and to make an effort to actually have to like go out and do the emotional work to then go interface with people or join up with people. So through that experience of mine, I learned the importance both of not excluding myself, but also making an effort to include other people who are potentially starting to retreat or may need some extra support.
Yeah, I get that. Mm-hmm. Kristie?
Yeah, I can recall a time in my career where I was filling in for the leader that I report to, and it ended up being a lot longer than anticipated. And so I asked, well, I've been doing the job at this point for like 9 months. Can I just have the job? And then finding out that I wasn't even being considered for the job, that I was good enough to do it basically for the pay of the person lower, for free, kind of for free for them for that time. And I remember when they finally did bring someone in, I had been doing the job for 15 months and nothing was on fire. And I remember as I was literally training him to lead me, he wanted all of my work, and he would ask me, hey, can you go and do this, and can you prepare this, and I need some slides for this and this. But then I would be like, oh, when's the meeting? And I was exclusively excluded, from going to these meetings, but he was taking my work and representing it as his work. And I remember when I finally got the courage to try to kind of say something, because at this point he had been on board for over 120 days. And it's like, at what point, are you going to start to do, this work, and I can go back to the job that I'm being paid to do? And I ended up just having to kind of cold turkey quit that job. because it was just so much for me. It was so overwhelming for me mentally and emotionally. But I just remember when I got to my next position, and I remember my manager there didn't know anything about this ordeal, but I remember them asking me a question, and they were just like, well, how can I best support you? And I find myself saying those words a lot today as a manager, as a leader. And I remember in that moment, I didn't have any words to offer back to that person about what does good support look like, feel like for me through my eyes, and how can I articulate that to this person. But that moment sticks out to me, because now when I ask people, like, how can I be of service to you, is what I like to say instead of how can I support you. How can I be of service to you? How can I make things better for you? I just think that it hits a little bit differently, because you don't always know what the support is that you need until you receive it, and then you're like, oh, that's what that feels like. That's what that is what it feels like to be included and to feel safe and secure and all of those things.
Mm-hmm. That's also something we touched on in our conversations previously. We were talking about, Sean was saying, I think that we were so overwhelmed by the question, how are you doing? Like, I don't even know some days. And I think reflexively we're like, fine, I'm great, everything's good. But I think if you were to actually like do an introspection, you're like, am I? And so you've actually flipped it to a different question.
Yeah, the question I lead with in one-on-ones when I'm meeting with my employees is, what's at the top of your mind today? And similarly, how can I best support you? Because you can make a lot of assumptions based off of what you think is going on, what you know is on their plate, but they might not need any help at all. But when you ask the question, what's at the top of your mind, you get personal responses. You get to build trust. You get to learn more about them and who they are outside of work, and then also the important stuff, the business stuff. What's going on at work that I can help with?
Yeah. So Jaime, I also want to give you an opportunity to answer that question.
Well, I think what's really interesting about panels like this is that there are lots of different ways to look at inclusion, but I think that this is something that affects everyone, because I'm going to ask the crowd right now to just take a second and think about the last time that you were in a room and you weren't sure how you were being received, or maybe you weren't feeling supported, or you weren't sure you could say something and how that would be returned. And it doesn't have to be work, it could just be in life. And I think for most of us, we have some memory of an experience like that. And there's differing degrees of inclusion in things, but when we're talking about inclusive teams, it's not about these people are included and then everyone else is not. We really all can do a better job of making things more inclusive for each other. And when I think about times that I feel included, like I loved your example of feeling supported, because all of a sudden I feel like I can do my best work. I feel like I can speak more openly about the ideas that I have. I feel that if I take a risk, I'm not going to be penalized for that. And so when we're doing this conversation, I always joke that VPs of engineering love new technology because they're like, oh my goodness, we're gonna get so much more productivity out of this. Yes, we're gonna, if you just let people sleep and drink more water and relax and be able to communicate with one another, I swear your team's productivity is going to skyrocket in ways comparable to adopting new tech. Except Datadog. Datadog is the one tech that but I think that's why this matters so much. We are at the end of the day humans, and we are social creatures, and we're just trying to build spaces where we all can work better together.
Yeah, we value sleep at Datadog for sure. I wanted to touch a little bit, Jaime, I think there's a common theme we've been touching on, which is around safety. So I wanted to dig more into how the concept of safety applies to building inclusive teams and how it's something that benefits everyone on the team.
Yeah, so I'm a neuroscience nerd, so I apologize if this is neurosplaining or just way too nerdy, but the way that your brain works is it basically is trapped in this black box, which is your skull, and it just gets sensory inputs in there. And what your brain tries to do is it tries to map the stimuli that it gets to your past experiences to get a sense of what's going on. And so my favorite example, this is from How Emotions Are Made. which is a fantastic book, Lisa Feldman Barrett. She was on a blind date. She wasn't really feeling the guy, but all of a sudden her heart started to race and she started to sweat a little bit. And she was like, oh, maybe I do like this person. So she's like, okay, I'm gonna go for a second date. And the second she got home, she vomited all over her apartment. It turns out she actually had the flu. But because she physiologically had the feelings of infatuation in a context of a date, her brain referred back to it, made a prediction that said, oh, maybe this is infatuation. That's actually how our brains work. We are always generating predictions based on past experiences. And that sense of safety is all our brain is actually there to do. It might seem a bit heady and philosophical for a tech conference to be talking about safety, but when you're in a meeting, that's what your brain is constantly doing as you're proposing ideas or you're working with coworkers. You're trying to maintain a sense of safety. And if you can understand that and see that everyone's trying to figure out their level of safety, you're gonna notice just the team opens up and flies in unbelievable ways. And then the opposite has happened. So again, if you can remember a time in a meeting where you didn't feel safe sharing something, it's because your brain all of a sudden had all these reference points to say, maybe there's a consequence or a risk for me to take this action. And it does change the way that then we act at work and in life. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Yeah.
He's been pushing these books, so I have like a really long reading list after just meeting them. So thank you for that. So Sean, you and I have the opportunity to work together at Datadog, a luxury, a benefit. And I know you've experienced something at Datadog that was only possible because you felt safe and supported. And we've discussed this prior, so I do know that you're comfortable talking about it, but I'd love if you could talk about having a safer space and how that enabled you to be your authentic self.
Yeah, and like I alluded to this at first with my first statement on gender transition. And again, like this could be applicable to any kind of transition in life. Someone has kids, someone loses someone close to them. But to be able to transition, specifically for myself, my own experience, started, and some background context, I've been with Datadog for 5 years. And when I started, I very much came in and feared every day in the office because there's this thing that I was hiding. And it was obvious to me, it was obvious to some other people, but it wasn't obvious to strangers, it wasn't obvious to coworkers. And over time, I built relationships and I built some trust, and I had a manager who was really great and started asking questions about pronouns. Like I used pronouns in a Slack channel, in a public Slack channel, and someone referred to me as they. And he pulled me aside and he was like, do you use they, them pronouns? And I was like, yes. And I felt caught. I felt outed and I felt caught. But ever since that day, when he asked me that, it then allowed me to make steps with him, alongside him, to feel safe in that space. Continuing on, I'm lucky to have my old manager here now, Lee Freer. He's our VP of sales engineering, commercial sales engineering. And I had gone through another transition. I was transitioning from our support engineering team to our sales engineering team. And that was really exciting for me, but I was terrified because I was being introduced to this whole new world of people that I didn't know. And Lee had I don't even know if you remember this, but had asked me in a meeting, what can I do for you to make this easier? And admittedly, he mentioned, like, I'm not super familiar with this, and I just want to be able to best support you. And I took that as a moment of leadership that I carry through now for other people. Maybe not as extreme as gender transition, maybe not as obvious or noticeable, but I take that as what do you need and how can I best support you in that? And that just brings this, with the theme of inclusion, it brings inclusion without having to call it out every day. Like you and I love DEI, we all love DEI, and we call it out probably all the time. But it's just the actions of continuing to do it and continuing to make these small changes and these small tweaks that they're not going to make these huge, grand impacts on DEI overall, but they're going to start to chip away at some of the exclusions that people do feel.
Yeah. And it's interesting, I think, as underrepresented folks, sometimes we feel like we don't have a ton of power and privilege, but we do. Sharing pronouns is probably one of the easiest things that we can do. And we've discovered in kind of this, pandemic world where we were all forced to be virtual, it was such an easy way for us to just put it in like our Zoom title. And then it was like, when that went away, we were like, how do we tell people? And so I think having leaders who create that precedent, who create that space and use their power and privilege to basically give permission and set the tone, even if it's something that they present, in a more straightforward way than others do. It's just that. It's that easy.
May I?
Yeah, please.
To that point also, like through the pandemic, I had gotten very comfortable working at home. It was easy, the bathroom was accessible. I didn't have to introduce myself newly to anyone, my pronouns were there. And then as the pandemic started to end, there was a lot of anxiety I had going back to the office and kind of having to reintroduce myself. And then I was lucky enough to have the support of my team to be able to go remote and to be able to kind of work with that. It's not that I don't want to be in the office, it's just sometimes it's a lot easier to exist in that way. And if you think about that and extract that to other people, how accessibility could be easier for people who are remote with disabilities, or being able to read from a Zoom prompt versus being in a meeting and not necessarily being able to hear someone. So all of the little pushes towards inclusion that remote provides, having that balance is very important.
Yeah. And also on the flip side, having representation visible in the office, that value of making sure there's not an erasure of underrepresented folks who are only remote, and then we don't see them and we're not making spaces for them and we're not being conscious about that too. So it's a really delicate balance that I think we're all trying to navigate post-pandemic.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting about the pandemic, I lived alone during the pandemic, which was, I know that there were people who had kids running around, that was very stressful, but then also only being by yourself the whole time is very stressful as well. So I actually became a mindfulness instructor during that time because I needed something to do. And one of the exercises we did was to figure out where to put a desk and a chair. Some people prefer to sit facing the door, and that makes them feel more comfortable and able to do work. And some people can sit away or they're back facing a door. And so I'm actually sitting here looking at all of you and where you chose to sit. And it kind of makes me a bit curious, because why did you choose the seat that you sat in, and does it make you feel comfortable? And yesterday, actually, at the speakers dinner that we had, we were chatting with someone and she positioned herself. She was like, oh, I like to stand here. And it reminded me that I loved that there was a self-awareness of understanding how we feel safety in the spaces that we're in. And so when we talk about return to office, there's so many layers to that. I can't work in an office, like an open office space. Too much noise actually overwhelms me because I'm an auditory processing person. Inclusion is all across all those different dimensions. How do I work well? How do I feel comfortable working? And it can sometimes feel like a rabbit hole to go down these things, because it is easy to trivialize, right? You could say, you're just sitting somewhere. Why does that matter? But at the same time, what I love is bringing curiosity to it and going, well, wait a second, why does that bother me? And how do I make myself feel better? If it makes me feel a little bit better to just be by the window and be able to see a plant outside, that's kind of cool that you have that additional piece of information about yourself now and what makes you feel more comfortable. And I really want that for everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Kristie, I actually wanted to ask you about this. So we know that we're never one thing. There's so much intersectionality and facets of who we are, and diversity is not only what is visible. What's your approach to hiring that looks beyond these characteristics of race and gender to advance diversity?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of hiring at Netflix, completely turned over the team that I lead now, and I'm hiring now, SRE, if anybody's interested, see me. Shameless plug. I have engineering personas, and it's not my idea. I stole it from, I can't remember his name, but someone who wrote a book about this. And I have engineering personas that I mapped out that I needed, that were necessary to be successful on my team. And so some of those personas were around, like I joked over in the speaker room, you know, I ask candidates all the time, do you like people? Because we really deal with a lot of people. You have to talk to a lot of people, even though we're in engineering. You really have to like people to be good at this job. We have 4 different personas that we look for. And so it's not just about making sure that people look differently on the team, or I think about geographic concerns, because my team is all geographically dispersed. We have people on the East Coast, the West Coast, have people in Washington State, people in Florida, like they're everywhere. And having a balance, because I remember when the first East Coast person that we hired, 6 months in, he was like, are you interested in hiring other people on the East Coast? Because I feel a little lonely when I'm up at 6 o'clock in the morning, you know, California time, working on things. And that just kind of like, it made me look at things like very differently. So I was very intentional about making sure that I had time zone awareness, those personas, because we wanted to be able to hire not just smart people technically, but people that were going to bring something to the team that it already doesn't have for additivity. And that doesn't always come in the technical space. Sometimes that comes in that, we like to call them softer skills. I think they're really hard skills. So looking for people that maybe had an interest in training, you know, or people that used to be a teacher, or people that, you know, I don't know, just really interesting things like, oh, this person, you know, plays a couple of instruments. Like, what does that bring to their work, you know? And I found that people really appreciated the opportunity to bring those other parts of themselves into the space and figure out, how can we use this? Like, is this something that will help us have better awareness of our users? Or, you know, I'm left-handed, so I'm always, you know, bringing up, oh, does that work for left-handed people, you know, and things like that.
And you also are a military veteran. And so when we think about, you mentioned, oh, this person used to be a teacher. I think we don't traditionally think of military veterans in the tech space, but they are actively seeking, you know, new tech as they are entering civilian life. There's a ton of intersectionality. There's a ton of leadership skills that they are experiencing in the military as well, which I'm sure you're well aware of. So it's really broadening our perspective of what that candidate could not even look like, could be. Yeah.
There's so much around. I think, you know, one of the things I learned and love about being queer was that it made me really self-aware about the things that I'm supposed to hide and the things that I'm supposed to be allowed to say aloud and be, and how do I present. And I wish for everyone the ability to really express themselves, because I love Disney stuff. So I'm at Disney World. I love seeing the kids just in a world of imagination just playing. And then you look at adults and you go, wait, where did that go? Right? We allow it when we get to see our kids again, sort of run around and pretend to be astronauts or dinosaurs or princesses or whatnot, but we sort of don't allow that for ourselves because we're now apparently adults, and apparently that just means being dull and polishing ourselves down to the blandest things. And to me, though, instead, it's more magical when we can allow people to be, frankly, the weirdos that they are, and also the hurt people that we are. One of the things that while I was hearing your story, I just thought of is some of the toughest conversations I have at work are not about the technical stuff. It's when someone's had a loss and you can see on their face how tired they are, what they've gone through, and they're still there. They're still trying to be in that meeting for you. They're still trying to get their work done. And the ability to just go, yeah, that's really hard what you're going through. Those words, if you mean them, will mean everything to that person that you're saying it to. And that's the kind of stuff that, to me, I want to be a space where if you're going through a really tough time, you don't feel diminished for going through that. You don't have to hide going through that, because we all go through tough times. I want a leader and I want teammates who understand what it's like to go through tough times and to support one another through it and not shame each other through it. And that, it's a learning process. You don't ever get that innately.
Good point.
Got so real. Everyone take a breath. I apologize for that.
That just reminded me, we bring every experience that we have into our workplace. And we were talking about workplace trauma. And the kind of like, you walking on eggshells when you first join a team of how am I gonna be treated here? And so I had this job a while back. I had surgery in the morning and then told me I had to be there in the afternoon. So I was like out cold in surgery. I had to be at work in the afternoon. And I did it. And that was how I learned to be in a work environment, is I had to show up. If I have something, it doesn't matter what I'm going through, I have to be there. And that's no way to cultivate inclusion. It's no way to cultivate a supportive team or a safe environment. And I take that experience, and I'm listening to both of your experiences, and it's highlighting how important it is to continuously listen and support. And that's really at the root of it. What creates inclusion is to not other someone on your team for something that they're going through, or of course people do mess up. Of course there are times for helping them get better, or potentially reprimanding them. But 9 times out of 10, there's probably something going on in their personal life if it's out of character. And the inclusion part comes in from helping to kind of sort through that and make sure that, again, there's the support there to access what they need.
I think when we hear like that example of like, having surgery in the morning and then having to show up at work hours later, we're all like horrified. I don't think anyone in this audience or in this room was like, yeah, that's a totally reasonable request. I think we're all like, that's awful. That is not creating safety. That's not creating support. Why does it happen then? Right? I feel like the general consensus is that's not okay. And I hope that continues, that's not okay. I hope that is, in the past, that's a former way of working, but I think we know that it still exists. So how do we challenge that? How do we challenge our leaders and our team members to be more empathetic to real life issues that are happening, to allow us to have that space?
Yeah, so something that I'm known for is I researched stress and burnout in SRE, and I spoke a lot at SRECon around it. And it meant diving into a lot of journal papers around this, because everyone wants data, right? Like, give me the data on this. Why does it matter to not talk negatively? Because sometimes, if you heard the way I talk about myself sometimes, I would never let anyone else talk to someone else that way. But the way we can talk to ourselves when we don't do something, oh my goodness, if you would stop in the street, right, if you heard it. But it was a way that sometimes we were culturally raised, right? The idea of if you have surgery in the morning, well, you have to just toughen up and come in the afternoon. But there's been a study on Olympians. And Olympians train very, very hard for many years for that one moment where some of them are literally doing their sport for only minutes at a time. And sometimes they don't get where they want to go. And they did a study between those Olympians who practice self-compassion and talk to themselves. It doesn't mean that you pity yourself or that you let yourself not be accountable, but you don't shame yourself, you don't berate yourself, versus those who tried that toughen up and just do it mentality. And the ones who had self-compassion actually bounced back and did better far sooner than those who did not have self-compassion for themselves. So I think we are culturally raised to believe that if I just am hard enough on you and me, we'll get to where we need to go. But the data does not support that. Instead, the ability to talk ourselves through what happened, hold ourselves accountable, but also understand compassionately why that happened, that actually gets us to where we want to go faster.
Yeah. I don't know if there are any like Real Housewives of Atlanta here. Stick with me. There is one of the housewives. She's a former Olympian, and she actually talks about this, how she went and, same thing. You train forever for this one moment. And she ended up getting, I believe it was the bronze or the silver, and she talks about, I lost the gold, is how she framed it. She didn't say, I got the bronze or silver, which, by the way, is huge. She just said, I lost the gold. And it took her a really long time to reframe it in her mind, to embrace, I won bronze or silver. And then she went back and she won the gold. But it was fascinating how she even identified, until she could change how she even framed it to herself, this massive accomplishment of an Olympian. It was just a really interesting anecdote to piggyback on top of your Olympian data point.
I love it. Yeah, it works until it doesn't, right? And I think we all know that, where we've done enough negative self-talk and we think it works until it stops. It just makes us sad.
Yeah. I'm getting a little buzzer that we're getting close on time. So I'm going to speed ahead to a question that I want to open up to all of you. So we're approaching the end. We know there's way more to talk about than a 40-minute discussion allows for, but I hope that this was a little bit of a taste of exciting DEI and how you can bring it back. But I'd love to close with what DEI advancement looks like, because it's not a final destination. We don't achieve it, high-five each other, and pop some champagne. That's not what it is. So for each of you, can you share what the journey entails? What's part of that journey to ensure that we're making meaningful progress at our organization? Whoever wants to start.
I can start. I talk about it every day. Well, I don't want to exaggerate. I talk about it most days with my team. Just talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how it's important. In sales engineering, we are very business focused, we are very technical focused, and we want to win. And a lot of times we are interfacing with our customers. A lot of you are customers who have probably worked with our sales engineering teams at Datadog. And you meet different people, different backgrounds, different cultures every single day, and talking about the importance of being open and being empathetic to whoever it is on the other side of that Zoom call, and making sure that we're bringing them in. And from that conversation, from talking about it from an external perspective with customers, we started talking about it internally with our team. And I see them starting to assist each other and create safe spaces for each other. Safe spaces is such a buzzword, but it's so important because they continue to collaborate and they're growing, and then they bring other people in from outside of our team. It goes through to the interview process. It goes through beyond that. Are we starting from the very moment that they walk through the door, whoever it is? Are they feeling included? Are they feeling like they have a space here? And then onwards to the team. And that can set up continuing to build inclusive teams if you're incorporating this mindset from the time they come through the door to the time that they are on your team, and then onwards. It's always a process. It's always continuing.
I can follow up on that. I think that remaining curious and always being open-minded about learning about other people, and knowing that you'll never know everything, and you may not even be able to understand it, but respecting it, And so I try to remain curious. I try to encourage my community, my team, folks around me to remain curious and to approach things with a curiosity of asking questions rather than judging. And that's hard because as humans, I think it's human nature to judge things based off of your own set of values or your own set of what's right and wrong or what's black and white. So that's one thing, always learning. The other thing is empathy. Empathy is so important, and just knowing that someone can try to empathize with what you're going through. Maybe they've never been in that situation, but they can see that it's having a toll on you, or they can, I can imagine that. And empathy just goes so far with building relationships. And you have to be in relationship with someone for them to trust you to bring you along on their journey, right? Mm-hmm. If you're not in relationship with them, why would they invest in you? And so one of the things that one of my former leaders used to always say to me is, I always felt like he expected me to teach him what it felt like to be a Black woman in tech. And I used to always say, there is so much research out there. There are so many papers you could read. There's so many YouTube videos that you could go and watch. And I remember the day, we're still friends today, thank goodness. I actually had brunch with him in New York last week. And I remember telling him, I was like, do you remember that conversation we had that day? And he was like, oh yeah, I really stepped in it. And, and I said, it's okay for you to ask me those things now, because we are in relationship with each other, and I want to invest in you. But you get to decide as an individual how you want to invest in the people around you. And maybe sometimes you're just tired and you're just fed up, and it's like, I don't want to teach you how to treat me, or I don't want to teach you about how I feel. Go figure it out with someone else. But empathy, it just goes a long way.
Yeah, I'm gonna just echo everything that you said. The best advice I can give is inspect your worldview. At the end of the day, you can tell someone until you are blue in the face about your experience as a Black woman, but it's about their worldview that they have to do the work that gets them where they need to go. And I put that on myself too, right? It's like that classic experiment that you might hear about where you go, picture a doctor. Now who showed up? Was it a white man in a white coat? Like, is that the first image that came up? Our worldviews are formed because of the different experiences that we've had and the things that we've seen. Remember the brain in the black box? So I spend a lot of time asking myself those questions. How did I get this worldview? And are they still relevant to me now? And what do I want to do with my worldview? And then that's the only thing that I will ask for other people as well. I can tell you all my experiences as a queer racialized person, but what actually matters is, where did you come up with your worldview around how you think about queer people, or people of different ethnicities, or people of different socioeconomic backgrounds? We all come with our own presumptions of things, but as grown-ups, it's up to us to update them and make sure that we're not using an old operating system. That's a metaphor I use. Sometimes I'm like, oh, this person's still using like Windows 97 with the way that they're thinking. And I'm just like, that's cool. I just hope they update their OS soon, because we're not in that place anymore, but it's on us to do it.
Yep. Yeah, and like Kristie said with that colleague, I really stepped in it. We're all probably gonna step in it. We probably all stepped in it. And even with the best intentions and education and being self-aware and challenging our worldviews, we will step in it. It's how we recover from it and the intentionality behind recovery and being better. And so I think that that's also how we have to wrap our arms around that. Even those allies who want to show up for us, they're going to step in it. But it's not on us to educate them, teach them about our own experience. It's how they recover from that. And I think we all can do that. So I think my little clock is ticking down. I don't know that I have enough time to open up for questions, but I did want to thank everyone again for making the time and space to come join us to talk about this topic at a tech conference. Thank you, Datadog, for also encouraging to have this space. I did not kick and scream to be on a panel, so I appreciate that they were really thoughtful and intentional about inviting us here to talk about this. And I really, really want to thank my panelists. I've learned so much from you. My heart is so full from this conversation and from knowing you, that you exist in these spaces and that you are paving these trails for talent that's coming through. So thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mayumi.